The U.S. has spent the last 2 days making its case for action against Syria. And in particular, I'm referring to John Kerry's major speech this morning where he laid out the evidence that we've collected that Syria used chemical weapons. So we've got a couple of different clips from Kerry. First, that evidence. Let's watch.
Our intelligence community has carefully reviewed and re-reviewed information regarding this attack. And I will tell you it has done so more than mindful of the Iraq experience. We will not repeat that moment. We know that the Assad regime has the largest chemical weapons program in the entire Middle East. We know that the regime has used those weapons multiple times this year and has used them on a smaller scale, but still it has used them against its own people, including not very far from where last Wednesday's attack happened. We know that the regime was specifically determined to rid the Damascus suburbs of the opposition, and it was frustrated that it hadn't succeeded in doing so. We know that for 3 days before the attack, the Syrian regime's chemical weapons personnel were on the ground in the area making preparations. And we know that the Syrian regime elements were told to prepare for the attack by putting on gas masks and taking precautions associated with chemical weapons. We know that these were specific instructions. We know where the rockets were launched from and at what time. We know where they landed and when. We know rockets came only from regime-controlled areas and went only to opposition-controlled or contested neighborhoods. And we know, as does the world, that just 90 minutes later, all hell broke loose in the social media.
So apparently there are a lot of things that we know at this point. Now, us on the panel might disagree with some of the intelligence that was presented there. I mean, he lays out very specifically that we know they were coming from regime-held areas, that we've got intercepted communications implying that they knew about it both before and afterward, which seems like pretty strong evidence. A lot of people are saying that this could very well be Kerry's Colin Powell UN moment. Is that how you guys saw this?
Well, I guess it depends on if you trust the United States government to tell you the truth. Because
do you?
I do not. I have to say, I do not. You know, we have to. We've already lost our credibility from the Iraq War and the run-up to the Iraq War. So now there's going to have to be a much higher standard of evidence presented, an actual evidence presented, not an assessment of evidence, which is what we got today.
The sad part is actually the lack of credibility that we have, because the way he said we know, it's not just the amount of times that he said we know, which was we probably heard it there literally 20 times. It's not just that he kept saying we know, but we know. Like, we know, because what he's really saying is we know you all think we're liars, so I'm going to keep repeating this phrase so that you stop thinking we're liars. I don't know that he convinced anyone of anything during that speech, actually.
He was not specific enough. I love that Desi pointed that out. I mean, it was an assessment of evidence that they allegedly have, but you do not delve into the details of that evidence. So where exactly were the he said missiles, right? Yeah. Where exactly were the rockets coming from? Like, I want to know specifics. I don't want you to say we know exactly where the rockets came from. Okay, that doesn't really tell me anything. And it was just reminiscent of, you know, the speeches that Bush gave before we invaded Iraq. It really, really was. He was sure, without, you know, a shadow of a doubt, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And of course, at this point, we know he did not have weapons of mass destruction. We invaded that country preemptively. We invaded that country preemptively, and that was a complete and utter disaster. Now, the efforts that the United States wants to take part in as a response to this, you know, the punitive response to these supposed chemical weapons, wouldn't even really be that helpful to begin with, as we talked about on the show before. I mean, at this point, we've given them more than fair warning. They've already evacuated the areas where the United States is likely to strike. And at the same time, I mean, we've had a history of doing these half measures. We did 2 half measures in 1998, one against Osama bin Laden, one against Saddam Hussein, and guess what? Those half measures did not work. So I understand that there needs to be some sort of response because they're worried that, hey, this is going to send the wrong message to other countries. But I don't want to get involved in this. The American people don't want to get involved in this. Only 9% of Americans believe that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, I will play devil's advocate for a short period. Of course, I would have loved if he had said, okay, here's the satellite photo that shows the rockets going off from the Assad-controlled areas. Although Colin Powell at the UN, he had lots of satellite imagery as well. That wasn't all that convincing. But before this, prior to this, this is actually a revelation of some sort. I didn't know that they had this information. I did not know that they had this information. We just knew that chemical weapons had been used. It wasn't very clear who would use them. Now, you can make the decision, and I'm very sympathetic to the decision to say you don't believe that evidence, but they are saying that they have it at the very least, and that is news to me, at least.
But we don't know that they have it. Like, it's
well, they're
one thing,
saying they have
it. It would be like me saying, like, I have evidence that an alien was found in China, right? But okay, so where's your freaking evidence? It's one thing to say you have it. It's another thing to actually show the evidence or to.
So you want real photos and satellite stuff?
If we are going to get involved in a conflict in another country, yes, at this point I would like more evidence. I would like detailed evidence, not just an indication that evidence might exist.
Yeah. Does it seem to you guys like this is purely Obama trying to save face? This is purely this red line thing that he said something a year ago that was broken, and it's like if he doesn't do it, that the credibility not only of the president but of the United States. I think this is really about Iran because he's saying, look, if Syria runs through the red line, then we are going to let Iran run through the red line. So it's his way of saying we're going to stop Iran.
Well,
that's what I really think.
It is that idea that, if he's just presenting this as a way to say, yes, I said this, and so now I have to follow through on it because I said so, and now we have to have our credibility is at stake and our resolve is at stake. But we also have the issue of these are chemical weapons.
Yeah.
This is a long-standing international norm. Chemical weapons are they, and this is the question I think, and the debate that we need to be having is, are chemical weapons morally different from conventional warfare?
Yeah, well, Jimmy Dore certainly argues that they are not.
What do we do?
Yeah, so on the issue of him saving face, I don't feel the same way that most, and I've read many articles of people who know a lot more about foreign affairs than I do who agree exactly with you. But I think that at this point, if only 9% of the country wants us to proceed, if even Britain, which we're going to talk about soon, is backing out with Parliament voting not to proceed, and many other countries around the world saying don't proceed, then the face-saving measure, I think, would be to not proceed.
Exactly.
No, but then, how is it saving face by proceeding? And
well,
it's
showing that he says something and that he means it, and that's what the United States does.
Okay, exactly. But as to that, us saying we are going to draw a red line, and if they step over it, us doing something in response, that might well be sort of saving face, but I don't think that it has to be about Barack Obama's ego. If he's thinking about Iran, that may very well be a good point.
That's what I think it is.
Do we want to, well then do you agree with that? Do you think that we need to react to ward off some future action by Iran?
Believe me, the last 3 days I've been going bonkers on Twitter. I'm completely against this 100%, but I do think there's some legitimacy to the argument, at least, that we have to do something here because of Iran. Because if Syria does this with complete impunity, look, first off, we're going to bomb a bunch of empty buildings that we've given them warnings for days. That's all we're doing. If we want to bomb empty buildings, we can bomb Detroit, and it'll make the property value better. I mean, but that's what we're doing. But really, this is about Iran, and if they see that we don't do anything, it just strikes me as very obvious. If they see us not doing anything, then what's to stop them from any red line that we issue to them?
I wish Obama never mentioned anything about a red line. I think that was mistake number one. But also, I just find it so hypocritical for the U.S. government to want to get involved in a humanitarian issue. Like, let's say, worst case scenario, Bashar al-Assad did use chemical weapons, and there is actual legitimate proof of that, right? I just find it so strange that the United States wants to get involved in that as a humanitarian effort, when at the same time we're doing like signature strikes and we're doing double taps in other countries, where we're killing innocent civilians in other countries. I mean,
it's kind of schizophrenic.
We are like the #1 terrorists. We're going into other countries, preemptively, by the way, and we're causing all of this, destruction because we want to make private contractors tremendously wealthy. And so for us to say, we want to get involved because we're genuinely concerned about this, this issue, I just feel like it's so hypocritical.
At least in regards to John Kerry's speech. Look, I think if we intervene, it should be to protect civilians. But at least in terms of John Kerry's speech, he did not stress the humanitarian aspect. He said very clearly that if we don't act, other states might employ chemical weapons, that we've set up this line that we're saying countries cannot cross, and if we allow them to, then God knows which dictator or which state in the future will cross it. So
once you cross
I
that
think
line,
they're
there's no line.
they're backing off of the humanitarian message like immediately, like backpedal, backpedal, backpedal.
Which
Maybe that's just my
is
perception of the one
kind of
speech.
odd and hypocritical, actually, because 100,000 people died before chemical weapons were used. So, yes, if you cough before you die, and I'm not diminishing what chemical weapons mean and what they do to you, but somehow 1,000 people dying that way is far worse than I would guess that the 100,000 people who are dead, that their families would argue that it's not that much worse.
Okay.
And I throw actually a couple layers to maybe this argument. And as John was saying, the devil's advocate part, because I mean we see there's not the definitive laid out there proof, but and this is maybe a product of the fact that our government has lied to us this long, and it's gotten us into these kind of situations, and we don't trust them, as Desi said at the beginning. We don't trust them. So now, if there is something that we need to do in any country for whatever humanitarian or American political reasons, how do you now prove it? Anna, you were looking for definitive proof given out there, outlined if it's something that's important. How do they give that to the American people? The guy in the middle of Tennessee who doesn't really know what the hell's going on. I mean, do we send out flyers? Do we send mailers to give every aspect of every information? Now, and again, it's a product of our own, actually, corrupt government that does so many messed up things in the world. We don't trust them. How does that even begin to come back? And then when there is something like this that's truly happening, somebody's killing those kids. Somebody's dropping chemical weapons on people. What do? We not care? It's such a hard situation. And it's as hard as this to say we should go in. It's just as hard to say, whatever, we're progressives, don't do anything.
I totally understand that. I don't want anyone to misinterpret what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's okay to use chemical weapons, that I'm in favor of Bashar al-Assad using chemical weapons. That's not what I'm trying to say at all. But in terms of, some of the terrible things that happen to people in, other countries, I mean, what are we going to do? Is the United States going to go in to every country where there needs to be some sort of humanitarian effort and use our resources and our time and just basically meddle in other countries' issues? I have a problem with that, because every time we do, it leads to more issues.
But again, we're not going in because of humanitarian issues. We're going in specifically because chemical weapons were used.
I totally get that. All right, so chemical weapons were used. Look, like I said, there needs to be more evidence. And back to what JR said, like how does the US government share that evidence with us? Look, the random guy in Tennessee that doesn't know what's going on isn't going to care about the evidence. But you know who does care about the evidence? The press does, especially the independent press. So how about a little more transparency with the government? Share that information, share that evidence with the press. That way we can actually understand why the US government wants to get involved in this and why they want to intervene.
Our only hope at this point, I think, to see that evidence is if that's one of the things that Edward Snowden took when he left America.